Silas Brant ordered a wife the way he ordered barbed wire and salt blocks, by mail, from a catalog, with a list of specifications in his own square hand. Quiet, strong, used to work, not given to talk. He paid the Chicago agency $4 for the listing and $7 more for the railway passage, and at the bottom of the letter, in case the clerk had any doubt, he wrote that he wanted a woman who would not argue. The agency wrote back that they had found him a suitable match. They did not mention that the suitable match had spent 6 years setting type for a Chicago daily and could read a man's whole character upside down in the time it took to lock a column of print. And they certainly never breathed a word that the quiet, biddable woman Silas Brant believed he had purchased had already decided, somewhere between Chicago and the Wyoming line, to be no such thing. Her name was Margaret Ellery. She was 28, and she stepped down off the Union Pacific at the Rock Springs platform in a cobalt blue traveling dress that had cost her a month's wages, her chin up and her auburn hair pinned close, carrying a carpet bag in one hand, and in the other a black cast-iron typewriter that weighed near as much as a yearling lamb. Silas saw the typewriter before he saw her face. He stood at the end of the platform in a brown canvas duster, gone pale at the seams, turning his own hat over in his hands. He had pictured a soft, grateful woman, someone glad of the country and glad of him. The woman coming toward him through the steam was not glad of anything. She looked like she was taking inventory. "You'd be Mr. Brant," she said. It was not a question. Silas. He took the carpet bag because his mother had raised him to. He left the typewriter. "You're Margaret." "Miss Ellery, until the words are said over us properly." She set the machine down on the boards between them, and the weight of it made a sound like a dropped anvil. "I'd like to discuss our arrangement before we go anywhere." He was not married to her yet, not a minute, not a vow, and already the morning was not going the way he had ordered it. "There's a preacher waiting at noon," he said. "We can talk on the way out. It's 11 miles. "We can talk now," said Margaret Ellery, "or I can buy a return ticket. The choice is yours, but I'd think on it before you waste 11 miles. The locomotive let off a long shriek of steam behind her, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. He took her to the ranch in a buckboard, and she talked the whole way, which was the first specification she violated. "I set type at the Chicago Tribune," she said, watching the country go by. 6 years. Then a new foreman decided a composing room was no place for a woman, and that was the end of my wages. I answered 3 of these advertisements, Mr. Brant. I chose yours." "Why mine?" Silas said. He kept his eyes on the team. "Your handwriting is honest, and your spelling is poor." He looked over at her then. "That a recommendation?" "It means you write your own letters. A man who pays a clerk to write him a wife is paying the clerk to lie for him, and the lie comes free with the woman. You misspelled obliged and necessary both, and you signed it yourself." She folded her gloved hands. "I'd rather a poor speller who tells the truth than a fine one who lies." Silas drove and said little after that, and somewhere in the second hour he found he had stopped composing the polite refusal he had been building since the platform. The homestead, when it came up over the rise, was honest the way his handwriting was honest. A low, sodden timber house, a barn that leaned a little east, 300 head scattered across leased range that ran to the foothills, a windmill turning slow against the empty blue. It was not the prosperous spread the agency had implied, and Silas braced for the disappointment. "The barn wants a new sill on the north corner," she said. "You can see it sagging from here." "I know it," he said. "Then we understand each other." She climbed down before he could come around to help, and she carried her own typewriter into the house. They were married at noon by a circuit preacher in a collar gone gray at the fold, with his wife and a neighbor named Tovey for witnesses. And Margaret said the words plainly and meant the half of them she intended to keep. There was no celebration. Silas had not thought to arrange one. They drove the 11 miles back in a silence that was not unfriendly, and the sun was going down red over the rock when he carried her carpet-bag inside and stood in the middle of his own house, not knowing what to do next. Margaret set the typewriter on the kitchen table. Standing, she fed a sheet of paper into it and typed for a full minute while he watched, the keys snapping like hard rain on a tin roof. Then she pulled the sheet free, laid it between the lamp and the salt cellar, and turned it to face him. "My terms," she said. "I find it cleaner to have things in writing. You'll see I left a line at the bottom for yours." Silas Brant had bought A Quiet Wife from a catalog, and on their wedding night she handed him a contract. He picked it up. He read slowly, as he did everything, his lips moving over the longer words. The list was short and typed clean, no smudge, no strikeover. 1. I keep my own name for my own work, whatever name the law puts on me. 2. The corner by the east window is mine. My machine stays there. You do not move it, and you do not read what is in it without my leave. 3. I will cook, mend, keep books, and work as hard as any hand you could hire, and harder. But I'm a hand who can say no, and when I say no, it is the end of the conversation, not the start of one. 4. If this does not suit either of us by the first thaw, we part as honestly as we met, and neither of us tells it crooked afterward. He read it twice and set it down. Margaret stood very straight by the stove with her hands folded, and there was a brace in her shoulders he recognized, the brace of a person told no so many times she has built her whole spine around expecting it. "You spell better than I do," Silas said. She blinked. "That's not a term." "No." He sat down heavy and reached for the pencil stub by the lamp. "But I figured I'd put mine on the bottom like you said, and I didn't want to embarrass myself doing it." He wrote one line, slow, pressing hard, and turned the paper back to her. It said, "I never wanted a wife who couldn't say no. I just didn't know that till you said it." Margaret read it standing up twice, as he had. Then she sat down across the table from him, and for the first time since the platform, her shoulders came down out of the brace, just a little, just enough. The first weeks were a negotiation conducted mostly without words. She learned the ranch, as she had once learned a composing room, by watching where the work flowed and stepping in front of it. She kept the books in a clean hand and found, within a fortnight, that the man who leased Silas his range had been overcharging him by the acre for 2 years running. 2 years, she said, and laid the column in front of him with her finger under the total. $31 he's had off you that he wasn't owed. He counted on you not adding it up. Silas looked at the figure a long time. "I'm no hand with a column." "You don't need to be. You married one." She rolled a sheet into the machine. "I'll write him. Polite enough that he can't take offense and plain enough that he can't pretend he didn't understand it." The letter went out typed and merciless, and the overcharge stopped by return post. Silas read his copy of it 3 times and said nothing, but after that he left the ledger open where she could reach it. She was not soft. She burned the first 3 loaves of bread to charcoal because his stove had a hot side she had not mapped yet, and when he came in and looked at the smoking ruin, she dared him with her whole face to say one word about it. He took off his hat and considered the bread. "Stove runs hot on the left," he said. "Door warped in a wet spring, never sat true since." "You might have told me that this morning." "You didn't ask me about the stove." "You asked me about the well and the woodpile and the ledger." He broke off a piece of the burnt edge and ate it, black crust and all, and made no face. "I've eaten worse off a branding fire. No shame in a hot stove a body hasn't met yet." That was the closest thing to courtship either of them had managed, and they both knew it. The neighbor Tovey rode over on the second Sunday to look at the bride, the way men ride over to look at a new bull. He sat his horse in the dooryard, tipped his hat, and spoke to Silas, as if the woman at the wash bench were not in the yard at all. "She keep a frontier house, you reckon? Or did the catalog sell you a parlor ornament off the train?" Margaret answered before Silas could. "I set 40,000 words of type a week for 6 years, Mr. Tovey, on a deadline, standing up." She was up to her elbows in wash water and did not stop the work to say it. "I expect I can manage a smaller house and a slower clock. Was there something you needed, or did you only come to inspect the stock?" Tovey opened his mouth and shut it, and found nothing in it, and rode home. Silas watched him go down the draw and then looked at his wife with the corner of his mouth doing something it did not usually do. "He'll tell the whole country you sassed him," Silas said. "Good," said Margaret. "It'll save us both the trouble of the next 9 like him." Silas was not what the catalog of his own letter had promised either. He was gentler with the animals than with himself. She watched him sit up a whole night with a colicky mare, talking to it low and steady the way he never talked to a person. And in March he carried a half-frozen newborn calf into the house and fed it warm milk off his own fingers. And she stood in the doorway in her nightdress and felt something turn over in her chest that she had typed out of her own terms on purpose, because she had not believed it was on offer. "You'll have it underfoot for weeks," she said of the calf. "I know it." He didn't look up. "You can put it out of the house if it troubles you. It's your house, too." "It doesn't trouble me," she said, and went back to bed before her face could say more than she'd allowed. In the morning she found him asleep against the wood box, with the calf's head in his lap, and an empty milk pail tipped by his boot. She looked at him a while, then put the coffee on loud, and he woke, and neither of them said anything about the night. "It lived, then," she said. "It lived." He got up stiff and put the calf out to the cow that had finally claimed it, and when he came back his hand smelled of milk and his shirt was crushed flat down one side, and Margaret poured him coffee she had not poured for any man in her life, and was careful not to let him see it meant a thing. They found a rhythm by April. She set type in her head, and he set fence posts in the ground, and in the evening she read aloud to him from the Chicago papers, 3 weeks late, while he mended tack by the lamp. "What's repudiate?" he said one night, not looking up from a buckle. "You read it twice." "To refuse a debt, to say a thing you signed no longer binds you." She watched him work the awl. A whole state did it down south. Voted that the bonds it owed were dead paper and it would not pay a cent. And folks let them. Folks are still arguing it in this very column. She turned the page. He asked her 3 or 4 words a night and was never once ashamed of the asking, and she answered every one without making him small for it. She caught herself that evening watching the lamplight move on his face while he frowned over the leather, and made herself look back at the paper. She had a term about this, and she was not at all sure she wanted the gate in that fence to open. The wind started on the last Saturday in April out of the southwest, dry and hard and smelling of nothing good. Silas knew before she did. He came in from the barn at midday with the color gone out of his face under the weather brown, and he said, "Margaret, come look at the south sky." She came to the door, wiping flour off her hands, and stopped. The whole southern horizon had gone the color of a dirty bruise, brown shading into a sick yellow, and under it, low and orange and moving, ran a line of light. The wind hit her in the face, hot and full of cinders. The grass stood tinder dry after a winter with no snow, and the fire was eating it from the south at the speed of a running horse. "How far?" she said. 4 miles, maybe less." He was already moving, throwing the saddle on the buckboard team, his voice flat and fast. "It'll come up our draw with this wind behind it. We've got the house, the barn, 300 head on the home range, and we've got maybe an hour. The neighbors are too far to come. It's you and me, Margaret." She did not waste the hour on being afraid. She knew the shape of a thing that has to be done faster than it can be done. "Tell me what burns," she said, "and tell me what stops it." "Grass burns. Bare dirt stops it." He shoved a spade into her hands. "We can't save the range. We save the house and the barn, or we lose everything. We plow a break, a strip of turned dirt around the buildings, wide as we can make it. The fire gets to the bare dirt, and it's got nothing to eat, and it dies at the line. But it's got to be wide, and it's got to be whole. One gap, and it jumps." "Then we don't leave a gap," she said. What followed she would remember in pieces for the rest of her life. Silas on the plow behind the team, driving a black furrow around the house and barn, the horses screaming at the smell of the smoke, and Silas hauling them straight through by main strength. Margaret behind him with the spade, breaking the clods, widening the line, and the roar of it, for a fire that size does not crackle, it roars like rapids in a river made of wind. "Wider on the windward side," he shouted back at her over it. "The sparks come from the south. South side has to be twice the rest." "How wide is twice?" "Wider than you think. Keep moving. Don't stop to look at it." She did not stop to look at it. One clod, then the next clod, never the whole of it at once, or the size of the thing would stop her hands. They wet sacks at the trough and beat out the cinders that blew across the break into the dry yard grass, running bent back from spark to spark. The heat came on like an open oven door, and the smoke took the sun away so that at 2 in the afternoon it was the brown dark of a winter dusk. "The barn corner," Silas shouted over the roar. "The north sill. It's punk dry. If a spark gets under it, we lose the whole barn." "I know it," she shouted back. "I told you the first day." She got to the north corner with a wet sack as the fire reached the break on the south side, and she watched it come up against the bare turned dirt and rear up, baffled, a wall of orange 3 times the height of a man, and begin to die along the line. Then the wind threw a fistful of burning cinders clear over the break, over her head, and one landed in the dry punk under the sagging sill and bloomed orange. There was no time to call for him. She went down on her knees in the dirt and jammed the wet sack against the sill and held it there with her whole weight with both arms, while the heat came through the cloth and the smoke poured up into her face, and she pressed and she pressed, and she would not let it have the barn. Silas found her there, when the front of the fire had passed, kneeling against the charred sill with a scorched sack in her blistered hands, her cobalt dress gone gray with ash, and a long burn rising red along her forearm where a cinder had found skin above her glove. The fire was running on north now along both sides of the plowed ring. He dropped to his knees in front of her and took her burned arm in both his hands so carefully, with the same gentleness she had watched him spend on the colicky mare. "You held it," he said. His voice was not flat now. "Margaret, you held the corner. It was punk dry." Her throat was raw with smoke, and it came out a whisper. "I told you, the first day, from the platform I could see it sagging." "You did." He was looking at her like a man reading a letter he had carried in his pocket for months and only now thought to open. "You saw it from the train." "Let go of my arm a moment," she said. "It's burned." "I know it's burned. I want to stand up and see what's left." He helped her up by the unburned wrist, and they turned once together, slow. Margaret found she was holding the front of his duster in her good hand and did not remember taking hold of it. "We kept it," she said. "You kept it," said Silas. "We," said Margaret, "kept it." And she did not let go of the duster, and he did not ask her to. The wind dropped at evening. They sat together on the dirt of the dooryard, too spent to stand, watching the last red lines of the fire crawl away over the northern rise. The 300 head had drifted down into the cut hay meadow and stood there bawling and alive. The house stood. The barn stood, a black scar up its north corner where the sill had charred and not caught. Everything beyond the plowed ring was a smoking black nothing, and inside the ring everything stood. "Tovey will have seen the smoke from his place," Margaret said into the quiet. Her voice was a wreck. "He'll come tomorrow to look at the damage. He'll come to see did the parlor ornament run. Let him." She leaned her shoulder against Silas's arm, too tired to pretend she had not. "He can write it on his way home that she didn't." Silas looked at the black where his range had been, then at the building standing whole, and found no words square enough for it. He went in and came back with a tin of salve and a strip of linen, sat down beside her in the ash, and unrolled the burn along her forearm to dress it. "This will sting," he said. "Most things worth keeping do." She watched his hands work, so gentle she had to look away. "You're better at this than the bread. I've doctored more cattle than I've fed wives." He wound the linen slow. "You're my first of the one and my last." "That's a great many cattle to set against a single wife," she said, and felt him almost laugh through the bandage. "You can tear up the terms," she said then, watching the dark come down over the burned land. "I don't suppose they matter much now. A woman who'll kneel in a fire for a barn isn't likely to walk off at the thaw." Silas finished the knot in the linen and turned the question over, the same as he weighed any hard thing. "I'd rather keep them," he said. She turned and looked at him. "Number 2, he said. "The corner by the east window. Your machine stays there, and I don't read what's in it without your leave." He tied off the bandage and laid her arm gentle back in her lap. "I want to keep that one as special. A man ought to have to ask. I'd like to spend a good long while earning the leave." The fire was a red line on the far hills now, almost gone. Margaret Ellery looked at this weathered, unhurried man who had read her contract and signed it and meant it, who wanted, of all the things on earth, to keep the clause that gave her the right to say no. "You could ask now," she said. He looked at her a long moment in the last of the light. "May I?" he said. "Yes," said Margaret. "You may." They added a room on the east side that summer with a wide window, and the black typewriter sat in the light of it for 40 years. She wrote the county newspaper out of that corner once the town grew big enough to need one, and signed every issue Margaret Ellery, because that was term number 1, and Silas never once asked her to break it. The scar stayed on her forearm all her life, a pale ladder up the inside of her wrist, and the black scar stayed on the barn, and Silas never fixed either one. When their grandchildren asked about the marks, she told them about the day the fire came up the draw, and she held the sill with a wet sack and would not let it go. And Silas, if he was in the room, would set down whatever was in his hands and say the same thing every time. "I ordered a quiet wife," he would say. "Thank God they sent me the wrong one." If this story stayed with you, tell me this. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone in the very first minute, the way Silas was wrong about Margaret on that platform? I would truly love to read it. And if you'd like another story about two people who started with the wrong impression and ended up with the right life, it's waiting for you right here.